everyone. This is Emily Kalashevsky, Member Programs Lead at the League, and I want to thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is titled Handling High Waters, Your Guide to Rising Lake Levels. 2019 brought the highest recorded lake levels since 1986, resulting in devastating flooding, erosion, and damage to Michigan's coastal communities. Join us for a discussion on what funding, technical assistance, and emergency resources are available to coastal municipalities. Today, you'll also learn the high water predictions that are ahead for 2020 and how you and your community's assets can be best prepared. A few notes before we get started today. Following the presentation, I will be facilitating a Q&A session with participants. To submit questions, please type them in the chat box on the upper left side of your screen. Following today's session, we will also email any links or slides referenced to all participants. And now let me formally introduce our speakers today. We have Deanna Apps, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Deanna Apps has worked for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the Detroit District for 4 years and is the lead forecaster for Great Lakes water levels. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in meteorology from Oswego State University and went on to complete her master's degree in geography from Michigan State University. She grew up in upstate New York and was a frequent visitor to Lake Ontario before moving to Michigan, where she was able to travel to the rest of the Great Lakes. We also have Nick Bonstell, Director of Emergency Management from Ottawa County. Nick Bonstell is the Director of Emergency Management for Ottawa County and has over 20 years of experience in the field of public safety. Nick holds a master's degree in public administration and is a certified professional emergency manager in the state of Michigan. Nick was the 2019 Michigan Emergency Manager of the Year, population over 60,000, for the Michigan Emergency Management Association. And finally, we have Ronda Wuycheck, Coastal Management Program Manager for the Water Resources Division for the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Rhonda has nearing 30 years of service with the state of Michigan, and since 2011 has served as the Michigan Coastal Management Program Manager for the Water Resources Division at Eagle. As the Coastal Manager, she promotes wise management of the cultural and natural resources of Michigan's Great Lakes coastal areas through the development of environmentally, economically, and socially vibrant coastal communities and supports the Great Lakes as a resilient natural system. She sits on the Coastal States Organization Executive Committee and is engaged with several advisory committees related to the Great Lakes coastal resources. Ronda has worked in several key positions in Eagle, including Enforcement Specialist, Assistant to the Field Operations Chief, and as District Compliance Coordinator for the Non-Point Source Program and NPDES Municipal Storm Water Program. Thank you all for joining us today, and I believe I'm turning it over to Deanna to begin.
Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction. So I'm going to take just a few minutes here in the beginning to kind of talk about where water levels are and kind of where we're going. So again, my name is Deanna Apps. I work out of the Hydraulics and Hydrology Office in the Detroit District Corps of Engineers. So we'll get started. If we go to the next slide. So just to start off, I wanted to briefly go over how we monitor Great Lakes water levels. So we monitor that using water level station gauges that are around the Great Lakes Basin. Those are represented by those dots that you see on the screen. The green dots are water level gauges that are run on the Canadian side of the basin. So they're run by the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans. All the blue dots are water level stations that are run by the U.S. And that's run through NOAA. Any of the dots that are bolded there, those are the water level stations that we use in calculating our daily average water level for each of the Great Lakes. So on our webpage, which I'll show on the next slide, you can get a water level report, and you can see where each of those water level graphics or the water level stations are coming from. So on that screen, you could see that on the previous slide, you could see that there was a number of stations that were associated with each of the lakes. And then if when you're on this slide, you can see this is what our web reports look like on the web page. So you can see that we have daily water levels for each lake that we show on our web page: Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron, St. Clair, Erie, and Ontario. Those are the lakes that we are monitoring on a day-to-day basis. You can see that here at the bottom, it's the monthly mean, which is, of course, July is not over yet, so it's the monthly mean as if the month ended as of yesterday, or, well, I guess the last day is the 12th, so as of Sunday. And then it gives it the monthly mean water level. And that monthly mean water level is really the main water level stat that we report out at the Corps, and that's mainly used in our water level forecast as well. You can see I've highlighted here Lake Michigan Huron. You can see currently it's the only lake that is currently tracking above its July record high water level. So its July monthly mean from 1986 was 581.99 feet, and right now we're tracking just slightly above 582.18 feet. You can see here as I'm seeing this pop in, you see we put Lake Michigan Huron as one lake, and we do that because they're connected at the Straits of Mackinac. From a hydrologic purpose, they rise and fall together. So that's why we consider Lake Michigan Huron one lake, and you'll see that on all of our graphics. This graphic here on the right is representation of daily Great Lakes water levels. And I know you can't, on the slides, it's a little bit hard to see, but if you go to this link, you can access this graphic, kind of zoom in a little bit more. But what it allows you to do is kind of see where the daily water levels are in comparison to last year, the long-term average, record highs, and then our 6-month forecast is on there as well. But we'll go over that 6-month forecast here coming up. So next slide, please. So the water levels go through a seasonal cycle every year, and that is largely due to the hydrologic cycle. So as this graphic is showing, in the winter here, that first section on the left, typically that's when we're at the seasonal low in water level. Sometimes in the winter, that's when snow is accumulating, the ground is typically frozen, and that's typically when we see that seasonal low. As we move into the spring and the snow starts to melt, we get increased runoff from that snow melting and the rainfall increases. That's when we typically see water levels rise. So as we come out of the spring and as we head into the summer, we see water levels rise. Once we get into the summer months, that's the typical time where we see water levels reach their seasonal peak. And during this time in the summer, we predominantly see increased sunshine, which helps warm the lake water. And that's really important as we head into the early fall and early winter, because the primary driver of water level decline during the fall is increased evaporation. And evaporation really occurs as that cold air starts entering the region in those, early fall months. And it's moving over that relatively warm lake water from the summer after it's been heated up. And that's really what induces evaporation. And the larger that temperature difference between the air and the water, the more significant evaporation that can occur, and potentially the greater decline we can see in water levels. Next slide, please. So this is our full period of record of water levels that goes back to 1918. You can see that there's a graphic for each lake: Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron, St. Clair, Erie, and Ontario. And what you're seeing, that blue line, is that monthly mean water level. So as I mentioned, that's really the main water level that we're reporting. So you can see there that, we go back to 1918. So there's the monthly mean water levels. You can see, as we talked about in the last slide, you can see that annual cycle that we go through every year. You can see see that pretty clearly on this graphic. The red line is the long-term average annual level. And from this graphic, you can see, just by looking, really without any, the numbers or anything, you can see that, we've gone through periods of both high and low water across the Great Lakes. If you click one more here, I've denoted some periods that maybe people remember. As you can see, in the late 90s, we transitioned to a decade plus of low water. And it was really, you can see that really definedly on Lake Superior and Lake Michigan Huron. They had experienced record lows during that time. And then it wasn't until about 2013, 2014, where we started to see water levels rebound And during that time, we really saw a record rise over those few years after 2013, and we brought water levels back up to near average. And then really over the last couple of years, we've seen exceptionally wet conditions, especially these last 2019, 2018, 2017. These last 3 years in particular have been very wet, and you can see it on an annual basis. We've really seen water levels rise over the last 3 to 4 years in particular to lead us to where these record high water levels that we saw last year and in 2020 so far. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go through the forecast. I'll have a graphic for each of the lakes. So we conduct a 6-month forecast at the beginning of each month for all the lakes, and we coordinate that with Environment and Climate Change Canada. We work really closely with them, so they, we put out the same forecast, especially since the Great Lakes is an international, crosses international borders. So you can find these graphics on our webpage, which I've listed here below. But I wanted to take just some time on the Lake Superior graphics to kind of walk through how to read these graphics. And you can see on the graphic that there's a zero line that goes horizontally across, and you can see that on the feet axis and on the meters axis, which you can see on the right. There's a zero line, and that zero line is really a reference water level that we call chart datum. And that reference level for Lake Superior happens to be 601.1 feet or 183.2 meters. And that's the reference level. That chart datum varies from lake to lake, so it's a different level for each lake. But each of these lines that extends from that zero line is really a representation of 2 inches. So if you're following, that zero line and you're going up, you got plus 2 inches, plus 4 inches, and so on until you get to that plus 1 foot. And you can see that on the feet axis there on the left. So that's kind of how you would estimate a water level based on this graphic. The lines that you're seeing, the blue dashed line is the long-term average levels for each month as you go through time here. The red line is the monthly mean levels that have actually been observed. Okay, so you can see that starting in July of 2018, you can see the monthly mean water levels that have occurred all the way through June 2020. When you get to June, that's when you start to see our forecast. And our forecast is that red band with the green dash line in the middle. That green dash line is what we consider the most probable or the most likely to occur. So that's really mainly where we think the forecast is going to be. That red, the band that extends around that green dash line is a 90% interval of potential water levels that could occur if we see very wet conditions or very dry conditions. And so it gives you that potential range of possibilities. There's a couple things that I've highlighted here on the graphic. You can see that there's some dash lines with the years on the top and the bottom. Those denote the record highs and lows. And what I've denoted here in this yellow rectangle is the record highs from last year that occurred on Lake Superior. So Lake Superior experienced record high water levels from May through September of last year. And then these purple arrows are provisional 2020 records. So Lake Superior also set a record in January and February of 2020. You can see that in March we fell below record highs, and we've been below record highs over the last few months. Lake Superior is still in its period of seasonal rise. It's forecasted to peak in August. This June 2020 level was about 6 inches below that record high 2019 level of last year. And over the next 6 months, we're likely to be about 4 to 8 inches below those record highs that were at least set through 2019. And then you can see in the fall, there were some records there from the mid-80s. Next slide, please. So moving on to Lake Michigan, Huron, you can see right away from this, you can see we've set quite a few records this year. No records last year in 2019 for Lake Michigan Huron. You can see that in June and July and even December, we were within an inch of records. So we were very close last year. But you can really see in this graphic that Lake Michigan Huron really didn't experience much of a seasonal decline last year. And that had to do with the fact that we experienced a very wet fall last year of 2019 and a very warm early start to the winter that really reduced evaporation. And because of that, the lake declined about half of what it typically does. And so we really started off this year really in record highs, and we've been that way since. We're forecasting records to continue in July and August on Lake Michigan Huron, but then in September through the rest of the year, we are expecting water levels to be below record highs. Next slide, please. On Lake St. Clair, a very similar story here to Lake Superior, where you can see records that were set last year, May through September in 2019. We've seen records 5 out of the 6 months so far of 2020. We are expecting this lake to begin its period of seasonal decline here in the next month or so, and we should be below record highs for the rest of the 6-month forecast. Next slide, please. Lake Erie is a very similar story to Lake St. Clair. You can see the records again, May through September of last year in 2019, highlighted by that yellow box. We've set records February through May of this year. We were below record highs in June, about 2 inches below that June 2019 level. But likely, again, reaching its peak and beginning its period of seasonal decline over the next few months and likely below record high water levels. And we'll go to the next slide. And last but not least, Lake Ontario. This lake also set records last year, June and July of 2019. You can see that in this basin, it's been especially dry over the last few months. And we've really already seen the peak on Lake Ontario there in May, and then it's really in its seasonal decline already. And although it's going to be below records, we're still going to be well above average. We're still going to be above that, that blue line, dash line is average. We're still forecasting above average water levels over the next 6 months. So if you go to the next slide, this is just some contact information for myself and my supervisor, John Alice. If you have any questions related to water levels, we do have a high water webpage at the Corps. This will get you resources to some really helpful links that you can see there on the left. Also, our other offices like emergency management, regulatory, and some contact information for those offices as well if you have questions outside of water levels. I'm briefly going to go onto 3 more slides I've got going over some of our emergency management activities. So if you go to the next slide, really this is talking about how can the Army Corps of Engineers help my community. And there's really 2 ways that the Corps can provide assistance, and that's really 1 through immediate emergency assistance and 2 longer-term solutions. So the next slide, this first slide is talking about more of that disaster response, so that more of immediate action. So USACE has the authority to provide disaster response and assistance to communities through a couple different avenues, 1 being technical assistance and 1 being direct assistance. Technical assistance is more knowledge-based products. So that would include data, any type of maps or training that we could provide. Direct assistance is more supplies. So this would be any floodlight supplies like sandbags or HESCO barriers, and that would be provided on a reimbursable basis. There is 1 hard really line when it comes to disaster response, and that is that erosion cannot be addressed under emergency response authorities through the Corps. So erosion, we cannot address that through emergency response. You'll see later there may be options for longer term solutions for that. A request for that assistance, either technical or direct, must be made through your state emergency management agency to USACE. So we must be requested by the state to provide that assistance. If you have any questions about emergency management, we usually try to have you contact your local emergency management agency, either whether it's the city or county first, and then reach out to the Corps. But you can always reach out to the Corps there at that email address if you have any questions for Detroit District Emergency Management. And then my last slide here is just talking about some of those longer term solutions and in direct response to erosion. So USACE is also a regulatory agency, so we do have permitting authority similar to what EGLE. So you would apply for a permit in conjunction with EGLE, and you can apply for a permit at that link. And then we also have the ability to do studies and or construction to address erosion. But like I said, those are more longer type term solutions, and you can access any information you want for as far as those programs go at that link there that's provided. So we also, I will say, at least I'm not from emergency management. We do have Crystal Walker on the line from our emergency management office that can answer questions if there are questions that come up on this. But that's all I have from the Corps.
All right, thank you. So yes, as the introductions were stated, my name is Nick Bonstell, and I'm the Director of Emergency Management for Ottawa County. And this is a great segue into kind of the boots on the ground, local level response on emergency management for coastal communities. I would highly suggest that everyone who has any interest in flood fighting capabilities or technical assistance to really reach out to either their county emergency manager and try to make those connections back with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They've been a great resource here for Ottawa County. We have been very fortunate to get some flood fighting supplies and kind of be on the proactive side of some incidents here locally with them. And I just wanted to say thanks for everything that they do. So two very important areas that I'll be covering with you guys today are both the erosion, historic erosion that we've seen on our lakeshore, and then also flood fighting, which has also been something on you know, a number of different communities that have felt that in the last few years for sure. As emergency management programs, we follow Public Act 390 of 1976, and this is known as the Emergency Management Act in the state of Michigan. It's also one that has become, you know, highly controversial with everything that we have going on. But I would encourage you to kind of study that, and then if you have any questions, definitely get in contact with your county emergency manager. Every county in the state of Michigan has someone who is assigned the emergency management capabilities for that county. So how did we get to where we are today? Well, we got to where we are today. You kind of heard, I'm just going to talk on a local basis here a little bit. Here in Ottawa County, we have had record rainfall, both on the 1, 3, and 5-year timelines. We've set records in all of those areas. We have had high Lake Michigan water levels to historic levels, as you saw in the previous presenter's information. And then on top of that, we've had some storm systems along with that erosion that have led to historic erosion and definitely some long-term flooding that we've experienced here in Ottawa County. So I'm going to begin a little bit with the lakeshore erosion. In early June of 2019, we began investigating from increased calls along the lakeshore communities. And those calls basically were saying that, hey, we're noticing some changes in the footprint here and just want you guys to be aware. So we initially did some assessments on foot, and then we actually took, we have a marine unit with the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office and took those marine units out to get kind of the view from the water. And it wasn't very long after that that we started to determine that this was going to be a long-term fight. This wasn't going to be something that was just going to go away anytime soon. And we needed to be able to keep up with the information as it changed and capture it so we could actually show in long-term damage of what has occurred. So basically what we did is we came up with a public information strategy, worked very closely with a couple other public information officers within the county, and began doing a pretty aggressive media outreach approach to getting to notify everyone on the lakeshore that, you know, now is the time to take action. Don't wait, and obviously many did, unfortunately, and we have had some structure loss because of that, but we wanted to see people take action immediately. So we began outreach with our local citizens, but then also with the local governments as well. One of the things that we had to determine was, how are we going to document this over the long term, and what are some of the partners that we could use with that documentation long term? And you'll see here in a second what we came up with. So this is a initial picture from a Michigan State Police Aviation unit. This is actually Trooper 2 helicopter. And we created a partnership basically through the Michigan State Police Emergency Management and Homeland Security Division to be able to use the MSP aviation assets to document the erosion that was taking place along the lakeshore. Our first flight, we started in August of 2019, and we've done interval flights all the way up until last month. Some of the benefits of using this MSP aviation technology is, as you can see from this, it has a GIS overlay, and it allows us to basically be able to see the parcel IDs and provide not only the citizen but also the communities with some long-term documentation. The photo that you're looking at here is in a neighborhood that is landlocked. It's got a road on one side and the lake on the other, and it became you know, pretty much one of the higher target areas that we were dealing with here on the lakeshore. So what you see in this photo here is a photo that was taken August 1st. Pay attention to the blue structure in the picture. This is just a few months later on October 25th, 2019. And you can see the severe and rapid increase in erosion in property to damage to that property just over a few short months period of time. Next here is basically when people decided to start doing work, they all started at once. And we started to get numerous calls about emergency work that needed to be taken place and help with expediting permitting processes. So one of the things I wanted to show from this photo is, even if you do the permitting process and, you know, things are getting lined up like they should, doesn't necessarily mean that we have qualified contractors out working on the lakeshore. Here in this photo, take a look at kind of where that seawall is placed and where that the house is up on the hill. You'll see the excavator boom arm there. In you know, the long term, we ended up figuring out that this was a contractor who, you know, really doesn't do a whole lot of Lake Michigan work, but was hired for this job. So this is a photo of this house in August of 2019. Same structure, October 25th, and we ended up having to demolish this structure as it was about 12 feet hanging over the bluff's edge in November because we didn't want the structure obviously in Lake Michigan. So with that, having these conversations ahead of time, not just with the property owners, but also with elected officials, both on state and local levels, and the local jurisdictions are a key part of this. So making sure that the communication path with the local jurisdictions is good throughout the process, because as you see in this structure, it really took everyone working together to make sure that this got taken care of. Along with the documentation piece, when we look at natural disasters that affect communities, there's usually a process called a damage assessment process. And that damage assessment process is really the process that quantifies the damage that's occurring within a jurisdiction due to a natural disaster. With lakeshore erosion, there is no damage assessment process that's out there. So we basically had to create one. And in order to communicate both with Eagle and with the governor's office and with local leaders throughout the state of Michigan, we wanted a visual image that would show not the amount of damage, but also the number of homes and the number of these properties that were suffering from this heavy erosion that was happening. So once again, in partnership with the Michigan State Police Emergency Management and Homeland Security Division, we tapped into MSP's GIS division and basically created a statewide damage assessment dashboard along with criteria that every county, every program in the state would use to quantify how bad the erosion was on a piece of property in their jurisdiction. And you can see from the picture here on the slide, we color-coded it. So if your structure was over 50 feet from the bluff's edge, you were green, you were good to go for now. We'll deal with you if it gets closer. The yellow is 25 to 50 feet. The orange is 10 to 25 feet. And obviously the red is anyone who has fallen in or was within 10 feet of the bluff's edge. So this helped to really put into place which structures were the most priority and which ones needed to get taken care of ASAP. So some things that you may not be thinking about that we definitely started to learn really fast in this whole process is communication, not just with the local level, but also proactive communication on the disconnection of power, gas infrastructure, and public health with well and septic systems. Having those discussions ahead of time is very important. The gas infrastructure portion of this is extremely important. If they are attached to a natural gas infrastructure and the property starts to pull away, obviously it could damage many more properties with moving that infrastructure. So we wanted to make sure we were doing proactive disconnects of those services through the local jurisdictions. One key aspect of this dashboard was the coordination with high-risk structures in Eagle and the permitting process to make sure that all of us were talking the same language and we understood which ones were high priority. Along with that, something you may not know is that we have a communication path with the State Emergency Operations Center through each of your county emergency management organizations, and it's called MySIMS, and that's what this picture is of. And we've been recording all of the information into MySIMS. So the state has had visibility on this from the beginning. Every single one of these entries that we've put in, we've documented the damage that we've seen throughout our jurisdictions. And they have been well aware throughout the whole course of this erosion, this historic erosion that's taking place. So with the erosion front, what are some things that we still need to be thinking about? With the state of Michigan not issuing an emergency declaration for the Lakeshore erosion, we are still attempting to gain access to different funding sources, although that's probably very unlikely. And we could have a whole nother webinar another day on why that is, but we'll leave that for now. There is Section 19 funding available at the statewide level for disasters. However, you need a declaration to be able to access those funds, and we don't have a declaration. We're going to continue our overflights and ongoing documentation within the state of Michigan on this erosion. If you talk to really anyone about how the water levels recede, technically they usually don't recede as fast as they come up. So the erosion aspect will be with us for some time. The nice thing is about probably 75 to 90% of our lakeshore now in Ottawa County it has a form of protection out front of it. So we've seen everything from rock revetment to different sorts of structures that have been built. And there definitely is a lot of limestone right now along the lakeshore protecting from further erosion. All right, with that said, the other hazard that all of us in lakeshore communities have been dealing with is flooding. And this picture right here shows our proactive approach to flooding. The picture on the left is actually a picture that we held community conferences in the winter. With all of the information we were getting from all of our partners, basically it was stating that we're going to have a pretty bad spring flood season. So we tried to get out ahead of it and have community interactive sessions where we had U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, National Weather Service, other response partners, Michigan State Police, give presentations on basically the best way that people can protect their properties. And we walk through what the declaration process looks like. The one on the right here is a sandbag training event that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers helped us with. And this is in the city of Grand Haven, where we basically took sand and sandbags and showed people the correct way to actually build, these structures on their property to make sure that they were protecting them as best as they possibly could. So these are some of the partnerships that I say are so important as you go forward. No one county can kind of deal with this on their own. You really have to lean on those other partnerships that you've created to make sure we're all working on the same path. So as forecasted, spring flooding did hit Ottawa County, and we had many residents impacted. The picture that you see here is actually wind-driven flooding off of Lake Macatawa. So the water levels are so high on Lake Macatawa that we had a pretty steady, I think 30 to 40 mile an hour wind coming out of the south, and it completely flooded a neighborhood on the north end of Lake Macatawa. So we saw flooding all the way from wind-driven lake flooding to high river levels causing river flooding to 12 inches of rain in a 10-day period that caused community flooding. So one of the big aspects and positives that we saw was our volunteer teams. Our volunteer teams within emergency management spent many days filling and placing sandbags that we already had pre-staged in the community. So we were able to get from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers sandbags that we protected critical infrastructure with. And at the same time, we ordered sandbags and put them out into the community to help protect private homes. So not all emergency management programs are going to be able to do that, but we were able to do that, and I think it helped quite a bit, to tell you the truth, having those pre-staged. We had 30,000 total sandbags pre-staged within the county. In the back of this picture, you will see another important partnership that we have with our Water Resources Division, and they have large pumps. So when you get to an area like this where you have a community that needs a lot of water pumped out, having those relationships already built and knowing where those pumps are located is very important. Here's another picture of volunteers filling sandbags and moving sandbags around the county. One thing that we did use for the flooding this year, which was a phenomenal tool, was a self-assessment tool where people could click on a link and basically self-report the damage that they were seeing. So one of the cool things that we see back in the Emergency Operations Center is we get a graphic that shows the layout of the county, and it allows us to pinpoint where the majority of the damage occurred in the county. So you can see from this, out of 376 self-assessment reports, we knew that the extent of our damage was definitely in the northwestern quadrant of our county, just due to the damage assessment reports that were being put in play here. So this damage assessment helps us to qualify for different programs. It helps us to determine whether we should be declaring local states of emergency. And in this case, we did. And we also qualified for a Small Business Administration disaster declaration assistance for low to no interest loans for our homeowners here in Ottawa County. So I want to leave you with this, and that's really that emergency management is all about partnerships. And erosion and flooding have greatly increased the need for those community partnerships, especially in coastal communities. And with that being said, it's critical to continue solid working relationships with agencies on federal, state, and local levels as you move forward. The National Weather Service provides many products that assist us in critical decision making. One thing that we heavily rely on is the river stream gauge information with the Grand River and the forecast heights that they give us for river forecasting. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers assists local units of government with the protection of critical infrastructure and public property, and they have programs that give technical assistance and strategy to the ability to access flood fighting supplies. So once again, just want to promote them. In the case of shoreline erosion, the permitting process and the relationship with EGLE became critically important. The Michigan State Police Emergency Management and Homeland Security Division is the clearinghouse for the governor's office, and decision-making for emergency declarations flows through them. So definitely having a good relationship with them is very important. And all local emergency management programs report to the governor through this division. So that is an important relationship that you're going to want to foster and continue to build. The Red Cross provided cleanup kits for our homeowners here to clean up the flood, and temporary housing, and they are a great community partner as well. And last but not least, if there is enough damage, you can obviously qualify for assistance. And whether that be a small business administration, disaster declaration, low interest loans, or the larger programs in FEMA's public assistance and individual assistance, it all comes down to the damage assessment and the amount of damage that you have occurred. So with that being said, my contact information is right here. I encourage everyone in your local jurisdictions to reach out to their county emergency manager and start having the discussions of hazard and risk long before these events occur in your jurisdiction. With that being said, I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, this is Ronda Wuycheck. I'm the Coastal Program Manager of Water Resources Division in Eagle. And I appreciate the time for you to take to listen to our presentations today. I'm going to take the conversation to a different place now and start talking about resilient coastal communities. And I'm going to be really targeting our local jurisdictions on this presentation. And to do that, I need to just let you know what we are as a program. And this is one of my favorite visuals to just put us back in the same frame of reference. Obviously, lakes define us. We are the Great Lakes state. We're the mitten. We are surrounded by 4 of the Great Lakes. What I like to remind folks is that Michigan has the longest freshwater coastline in the nation. We're 9th in the realm of length of coastline. We're 200 linear miles short of California. So just to put things in perspective there, and that this is 62% of the U.S. border. So we're definitely the major shareholder of the Great Lakes. With that, the Coastal Program, which was established in 1978, is part of a national networked program. We have 34 states, islands, and territories in the federal partnership with NOAA, and we do really take the big picture approach when it comes to working with resilient coastal communities. Our mission in Michigan is to protect, preserve, restore, enhance, and wisely develop, and just emphasize wisely develop on the coast with our natural resources and cultural heritage on our freshwater coastline. And now getting into some reference slides for you, because I know these will be shared with you. Basically, you've heard from Deanna's presentation that the water levels of period of record have been monitored, and that they're driven by precipitation, ice cover, air temperatures, and evaporation. And since 2013 till today, we are experiencing record highs on our Great Lakes. I really appreciate this present slide, and I'm going to reappear it here just to put us in that frame of reference that the point on that green sliver is the issue of rise from low to high has been all-time record as well, which brings us to this point of discussion today. Just to sum it up on what it means as impacts, being the longest freshwater coastline, not every shoreline is going to be handled or be in effect in the same manner when it comes to the current condition of high waters. We have coastal erosion that's severe, flooding, and it is definitely based on several variables from shoreline type to also the wave energy that's hitting your coast. So with that, the importance of being resilient is taking all the tools that you have to figure out what are those forecast futures. And I bring this up on the screen only to, and I appreciate what you said, Nick. This slide is part of a lot of the high water webinars that our regulatory colleagues are presenting. And I think in the terms of teams, these are a set of programs that are here that are valuable to the coastal community on how we can act concurrently with how to assist a coastal community. And then as well, on the regulatory side, we also have a high waters webpage. If you haven't been able to refer your citizens to. It has a host of information. It also cross-links with our core colleagues to help with that permitting needs that we have right now with homeowners trying to protect their infrastructure. So here's where I start the conversation in a little different manner. Nick's provided a wonderful presentation of the mitigation and trying to define what are the immediate needs right now. And I just want to give some food for thought for the rest of my presentation is the consequences of hardened shore structures, realizing that this is my program is about the long game, about coastal processes, and that there is a catch when we talk about hardened structures. And depending on where you are on the coast, your shoreline types and the wave energy and what kind of mitigation you need to do with coastal erosion, as this picture shows, that it also has the consequence of cutting off the sediment supply of the most important natural protections of our coast, and that's our dunes and beaches. So over time, I just wanted to point out that there's definitely a cost analysis when we talk about which structures are the most mitigation versus the long-term protection of the coast. And why is that important? And one of the consequences is the public trust doctrine. As all Michiganders, most of us who are able to enjoy, love to walk the coast. So when we do alter the coastal processes, it does have a consequence of diminishing the ability to walk the coast, as many of us do enjoy. So leaning in, building coastal community resilience. So community resilience is defined at the federal level and the state level is, in the coastal world, is the sustained ability of a community to understand and use available resources to respond to, withstand, and recover, bounce back from adverse situations. Coastal hazards is the #1 priority for the National Coastal Program. We, in Michigan, have close to 300, not more, 387 coastal jurisdictions that the Coastal Program works with. And we're trying to leverage our partnership and resources to build a network within Michigan to help promote community resilience. Our objective is to partner with coastal communities to devise resilient master planning, ordinances, and incorporate adaptation strategies to help weather the lows and the highs of the Great Lakes. As a hazard-ready community, we're hoping that with this engagement with the Hazard-Ready Coast Resiliency Strategy, that through the development of tools and scenario-based planning processes that involves the grassroots of communities, because that's where the power lies when it comes to building a resilient coast, is to be able to have an informed decision-making process. Managing coastal hazards is very tough, as we know with the media of the high waters. And what we're trying again is to develop what a coastal community can do if it's erosion or flooding to build it into that long game. We have pulled together what we refer to as a coastal resiliency team to help develop these tools. It is growing. On this chart doesn't reflect everyone, including the core who is sitting on our resiliency team to help us define some practical solutions or approaches, if you will, to partnering for hazard-ready coast. We are developing tools and scenario-based planning and methods and some case studies. One of the tools I wanted to highlight today was the 80-year viewer, working with Michigan Tech on our coastal resiliency team. And what this provides is, and is under development and accessible through that website, is a tool that's an 80-year viewer dating back to 1938, because we have to learn from where we are from where we've been as a forecaster. But this viewer can help pinpoint any site. Right now in the Lake Lower Peninsula, we're moving into the UP this year to help identify where the coastline has been and where it is moving. For instance, in the southwest portion of our state, the land is moving, the coastline is moving landward 1 foot per year. So what this viewer is providing is a basic vulnerability assessment that you can pinpoint a GIS point to see where the shoreline has moved to help. Again, it's a forecaster. So based on all the shoreline types and weather patterns and lake levels and wave energy, we're building this viewer as a tool. Is one of the things that I noticed in one of the earlier presentations. We have had very low lake levels, but right now we're dealing with high, and we sometimes think in a mortgage of our homes. Where is our infrastructure in this near term? This takes it to a little bit longer term. So moving really quickly into the adaptation strategies, and I want to open for questions. We really, in the coastal world, talk about resilience to have, protect, accommodate, retreat, and avoid scenarios. And just moving through some pictures for you. When we talk about protect, we're talking about somewhat immediate. What Nick was talking about, what has to happen right now to protect this infrastructure, seawalls, revetments. Those are things that are available right now to protect. Again, there's a cost-benefit analysis of by putting those hardened structures in, there's a maintenance, and it will eventually fail over time, as most infrastructure will. But it also can cut off the sediment supply and reduce beach development, where in the right side, if you use more of a natural base, there is ability to long-term have a beach and protective measures. In Grand Haven, they did a setback ordinance north of the navigational structure. This picture was taken a few years ago when it was not so high. But the point is, those homes are being protected by the setback and also preserving the public trust lands of transparency. Accommodation, this is kind of probably a zealous example from a sister program in the coastal world of a raised building, but I put it in here for food for thought, for maybe some creative thinking about building codes, especially in hazard-prone areas. Sometimes, as this couple of next slides, Mother Nature will win out on parts of the coast. So we may, in many instances, need to retreat and probably not rebuild in areas that are most vulnerable to flooding and erosion. So with that, really quick wrapping up, the coastal program has funding available to coastal communities, nonprofits and regional planning agencies to help coastal communities develop a resilient master plan and ordinances and demonstration projects. This is my team. This is on our website. And this, again, here's our website for coastal management. Please visit us, ask questions, and I thank you for your time. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our presenters today. We do have a few questions that have come in, so I'll welcome either of you or any of you who have something to share for these questions to chime in. One that came in as you were, I believe as Nick was speaking, was questioning specifically the record rainfall. Is that a result of climate change?
Oh man, I think after all of these different community events that we've held, I had a summit that was called Erosion 2020 in Holland, where there was, I don't even know how many hundreds of people were there. It's one of the things that keeps coming up. You know, I'm not a smart enough guy to be able to tell you whether it's climate change or whether it's a cycle. I think I'll leave that up for the scientists to debate. Our job as emergency managers is just to respond and hopefully proactively put some mitigation measures in place before it occurs. But that definitely is a debate that will continue throughout the course of this for sure.
Thanks for that. A couple of other questions that we've had come in. How long on average does it take a municipality to develop and implement an emergency management plan?
So every program, so there's just over, I think, 92 of them, 93 of them here in the state that receive a grant from the state that's called the Emergency Management Performance Grant. EMPG is the name of the grant, and it pays for roughly 40 to 50% of your emergency manager's position and salary. Requires that county to have every 5 years the emergency operations plan updated within that jurisdiction, and it also requires exercises on a routine schedule. So basically, it's not good enough just to have the plan. You actually have to put it into use and put it into place. The other plan that is very important into this discussion is called the Hazard Mitigation Plan. And the Hazard Mitigation Plan allows the community to set priorities of proactively where some of those mitigation measures should come into place. And I can tell you that erosion, lakeshore erosion, will probably rise on the list of Ottawa County's Hazard Mitigation Plan.
All right, so a few more questions before we close out today. Many communities are using sandbags, seawalls, inflatable barriers, and more to protect their shorelines. Are there certain types of barrier structures that are more likely to cause long-term damage to the environmental landscape of the area? How long is too long to leave those up? And are there some that should be avoided or carefully considered?
Hi, this is Ronda. I think I mentioned that when it comes to hardened structures, these are all decisions that need to be made on the current situations, high or low. Definitely with high waters, the seawalls and revetments are definitely going in at a very fast pace. We've had more permit applications in the last quarter than we've had all last year. But do they have an environmental consequence? Eventually, yes. And some experts would say it could be long-term. So, it's like I said, cost-benefit analysis of what needs to happen first, protect the home or protect the beach. There are hopefully some driving research with more environmental factors that play in, but anytime we alter the coast with a hardened structure, there will be some type of reaction in the natural processes of sediment movement down and creating beaches. So right now we don't have that. The coastal program is moving into that. Unfortunately, I think I said it, this is a marathon, not a race. Right now we don't have that information, but that's something that we're striving to find more information about.
Thanks, Rhonda. One final question. Funding is extremely limited for shoreline communities mitigating and repairing high water damage. Will there be grant opportunities provided by EGLE for communities that are seeking to address coastal management needs related to high waters?
I think that goes to me. We have an annual funding opportunity through the coastal program. I have not heard of anything in particular relating to other programs related just to high waters. Again, ours is really looking at the long game for resiliency, what happens with the low waters and high. But I believe there was some considerations before COVID from the governors, and I haven't heard much from that since the pandemic has changed the course on many things with our budget.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that information. Again, I want to thank Deanna, Nick, and Rhonda for joining us today. After the webinar, we will email today's PowerPoint and links to all participants. In addition, as has been the case with our other webinars, this will be posted in multiple formats for you to review or share on our website at www.mml.org. A few other resources of note: each Monday at noon, we've been conducting our traditional Monday Morning Live as a new Working From Home series with our lobbying team via webinar. As a reminder, you can join those via Zoom or watch live on our Facebook page. Next up in our series is another webinar on Wednesday, July 22nd from 10 to 11 a.m. titled What's Happening Inside MDOT's Local Agency Program. The Michigan Municipal League invites you to another installment of this ongoing webinar series with the Michigan Department of Transportation, where you'll get the latest updates on staff updates, changes at MDOT, including temporary layoff days, telecommuting, and virtual meetings, mutual benefit easements, conflict of interest forms, funding status updates, and much, much more. We also have the Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding Town Hall scheduled for July 23rd from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m., which will focus on grants and subgrants of the federal Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding. Here you'll get your questions answered and hear ideas and guidance from the Michigan Joint Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarceration about using the funds in ways that will pay dividends over time. Stay tuned for more information and other important webinar topics as we continue to provide you with timely updates and resources. Thank you all, and that concludes our session today.